Hello and welcome to another episode of Property Particulars, which is our LA podcast. And welcome today to my colleague, Emily Curtis-Bennett. Hello.
Hello, thank you for having me.
That's all right. How are you?
Yes, very good, yes.
Good. So we're going to start off very easy.
Perfect.
Who are you? Because you're not in residential property, but we'll get onto that a little bit later. But yeah, so what do you do at LA and how long have you been here?
So I am a solicitor and I work in our tax, trust, wills and probate team. So dealing with everything from wills to estate administration, powers of attorney, gosh, what else? Tax planning, trust, everything like that.
Yeah.
I joined LA back in March 2021. As a fresh-faced trainee, where I did my training contract and then qualified in September 2022.
Lovely. So you're now well into your career path of being a solicitor.
Yeah.
And you work closely with our team.
Very closely, yes.
In the room next door.
Yes.
But the cool thing, I suppose, for me in property with working closely with you and your team is that you've actually done the job on our side.
I have, yes.
I mean, and you actually were my trainee.
I was,
And you survived.
I did, just yes. Yes, I did. So it was my last seat of my training contract when I came to the London office. I'd done some property work before, when I worked as a paralegal at a previous firm.
That's right. But actually, and now I'm remembering that when you were working with me, maybe it was about 1 or 2 months in, and you were like, I've done legal reports before. And I was like, oh.
Yes.
How long did you do it in the previous firm? Quite a while.
About 3 years. So I did, I worked for private client and, so tax trust wills and residential property kind of under two. So I very much knew the overlap between the both and had experience in both. So I fit right in with you being able to do all of that.
We made a great team for those 6 months, I think. We sat opposite each other.
We did, yep.
We loved having a gossip in the morning.
Yes.
And still do. And actually, we went on some pretty cool transactions and exhibitions.
We did some really cool stuff,
Yeah, so you helped me on the launch of a development where we went to the development on launch day.
We did, which was really cool. Yeah, really good day.
And then we did quite a lot of transactions there.
Loads of transactions.
Which haven't actually completed yet.
No, they haven't.
So when they are, I think they're completing later this year. And actually, I've been getting back in touch with clients on those, and I see your name all over my files.
There we go.
But we did the first exchange of contracts in that development.
First exchange on that development.
So some things like that are always quite a cool memory, especially doing transactions and property around London when you're out and about.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Absolutely, those iconic, and will be iconic developments. I just remember when you came off the phone, we were the agent just said that was the first exchange, and we were like,
we
amazing.
Yeah.
We got there. We beat all the other lawyers.
Yeah. And so, despite the fact that you didn't want to qualify into my team and you followed your dream to go into the TTW, Tax, Trust and Wills team, as we call it.
Yep.
I think you have within our private wealth group, which is obviously a couple of other teams as well, it's like a great synergy that you have because you have that knowledge.
Yes.
And I can come to you with
pretty
much any queries.
And I do the same to you.
Yes, exactly. And so let's go on to a query or a legal point. So the most questions I get for maybe first-time buyer couples is they come to me, I do the source of funds with them. I work out sometimes not a great difference in the money that they're putting in from one of the couple to the other.
Sure.
Sometimes you might have a bit of gift from mums and dads thrown in there. But my first recommendation is always you should think about a declaration of trust.
Yes.
And then they say, oh, what's that? And I pass it over to you.
Yes.
Why should my clients have a declaration of trust?
So if you are buying a property together, so jointly, so there's a couple of ways that you can own that property. And that's really important for people to consider, especially if different amounts are going into the purchase and they want that to be reflected. So you can either own a property as joint tenants, meaning you essentially own it as one. If, one of you dies, the survivor inherits regardless of any will, and that's, there's no difference in ownership percentages at all in that. The other way you can own is as tenants in common, and that can either be in equal shares, Or it can be in unequal shares, which is where this kind of comes in. And the unequal ownership is set out in that declaration of trust. So it's sort of a back document, confidential document, and, you know, it can set out what contributions people are making to deposits, if there might be difference in perhaps mortgage contributions moving forward. Perhaps one party is going to be paying all the mortgage or a majority of it, and, you know, and they want that to be reflected. So if the relationship were ever to break down, or, you know, the property were to be sold, then there is a document that specifies, you know, what you're getting back, essentially. And just protects, especially if parents have put money in as well, and they want their, you know, child to get that money back, then it can protect there as well.
And so when I pass a client over to you and you start talking to them, I suspect at my stage, it's quite often like, oh, I'm not sure we need that. It's kind of like we don't mind, etc. But do you then find when you do that initial, because you're always happy to do a quick 5-minute consultation with my clients, free of charge.
Of course.
But do you often find that when you dig deep into that, actually you kind of unearth different bits, and they actually then think, oh, I do need X in the document or this as well?
Yeah, so there's quite a few other things that will kind of also, that I'll ask, because I think people think it's a lot simpler than what it is. You know, there can be other things to think about, but if you're going to, perhaps you're buying a property that needs a load of work doing to it, and perhaps, you know, one party's going to be paying for more of that, or perhaps work might need doing down the line. Perhaps in 5 years you think, okay, we're going to extend, and only one party can pay for all of that. You know, then there can be a clause to kind of cover that, and then will that affect the ownership percentages? And, you know, so there's all these other things, and, you know, to consider. And, you know, if the relationship were to break down, you know, do you want the right to buy each other out? Or how do you want that to be governed, you know, in the event that you can't agree to sell? So it can be as detailed or as you know, as simple as you like, really. So it's really good to find out everything, so that I can, you know, recommend what might need to be included and that sort of thing.
Yeah, of course. And then I'm sure this must lead on to the W question,
always.
Which again is in our legal report, which I say to every client, not just clients in this scenario where it's like maybe an unmarried couple. But yes, we say every time, think about a will. So wills in this scenario with an unmarried couple buying.
So if you've got an unmarried couple buying and you've done a declaration of trust, basically, you know, if you own that way as tenants in common, if one of you dies, your share of the property, whether that's 40%, 30%, 70%, passes in accordance with your will. If you don't have a will, which a lot of people don't, it passes in accordance with the intestacy rules. So the intestacy rules, you know, are a set of, you know, it's a legal set of rules that basically dictates who inherits, you know, when you die. And unmarried, so unmarried couples have got no right under those intestacy rules. It's only spouses or civil partners, you know, children, or, you know, if this is an unmarried couple with no kids, then it's going to be like their parents if they're alive.
Yeah, which isn't maybe going to be tax efficient.
Not tax efficient,
and
not tax efficient for them, because, you know, parents generally have more in the value of their estate because they tend to have paid off mortgages by this point. So you could just be increasing the value of their estate to then pass down. It can also just get a bit messy. So, you know, let's say I buy a property with a partner, I die, I've got no kids, I'm not married. You know, my mum gets my share. So my mum now owns a property with my partner. And if there's, you know, any issues in family dynamics,
which there will be
with in-laws,
always.
You know, and you know, one wants to sell, you can get into a real bit of a messy situation. So I always suggest, yes, if you're doing this declaration of trust, great, but you also must do wills to govern how you want your share of the property, whatever that is, to pass. You might want it to go to your partner, and that's fine, but you need a will for that because there's no provision under the intestacy rules for that.
And then, so if I have like a couple that are married, and that I still would say to them, so I'm less likely to be kind of suggesting to do a declaration of trust, and unless there is very specific circumstances for a married couple. But I always then also say to a married couple that are buying, you should think about wills as well. And
Yeah.
quite often, I'm quite astounded sometimes that even I have got clients that are in their 40s, 50s and 60s, and they're a little bit embarrassed sometimes to tell me, like, Doug, I've not ever had a will done. And this is maybe their third, sale and house purchase. They've gone from flat to first house to second house with kids, etc.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still advisable, of course.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Everybody should have a will for any asset they've got, and especially if you've got children, you need to, your wills, we can include guardianship provision. So, if anything happens to both parents while kids are under the age of 18, that's all included very much in there. So there's really important things. Yes, there's the tax, and yes, there's what happens with your assets, but also, arguably most important, what happens to your children. So there's all these things. So yeah, everybody should be doing their will.
And just another question that's kind of prompted from that is, so if it's a married couple or a non-married couple with the will, but if they don't have kids, because quite often I then get said back to me like, oh, we'll do it when we have kids. But even if you get a simple will done when you're buying the property, you can then amend it. You don't have to do new wills. Is that correct?
You can amend them, yep. So so if someone comes to us and they've done a will before, kind of look at what changes then they want to make. So if you've done a simple will, perhaps then, yes, things change, and things like having a child are a good point where you should think, I should probably update my will now, because there's other things to think about. And, for unmarried couples as well, if you get married, marriage revokes a will. So any will you've done before will, unless you made a specific provision, will you should consider that will be.
Wow, that's really important.
So that's really important. So if you do a will while you're unmarried and then get married, default position is that's revoked. So you must come back, even if you're signing the same thing again, and you don't need to change much, but it should definitely be reviewed at that point. So yes, yeah.
Thank you. And then one last little one, I suppose. What about just like, again, the other comment that I get a lot, which I am guilty of. So a single person buying an asset, buying a property, thinks, oh, I'll just deal with that when I am married or in a relationship or have kids.
Yeah.
But they should do as well.
Yeah, they should, because, because if they don't and they die, the intestacy rules are coming into play. I wouldn't just want to assume that not everybody has, you might not, some people have very small families.
Yes.
If your family have predeceased you, if there's nobody in that, bloodline through the intestacy rules, the bottom is that it goes to the crown, or it goes to the state. That's not what we want. Even if you want to leave something to charity, it's really worthwhile. And also, maybe you don't get on with your family. So, that those intestacy rules aren't what you would want to happen. So it's really important just to have something simple, and appointing executors as well that you trust. If you haven't got a will that appoints executors, generally just send the kind of closest surviving relative that takes that on, and maybe they can't do that, or maybe there's someone else that you would just prefer to do that wouldn't be grieving and find it. It's a big job to take on. So, yeah.
Thank you. So, let me book in an appointment to update my one straight after this podcast.
Absolutely.
But thank you very much for that. So, just as a fun little bit to end, going back to property.
Yes.
So, I'm asking people, what would be your fantasy dream house property to own, or location, or something within a house that you would just be the actual icing on the cake for you to have?
Well, that's a very good question. I think location, somewhere in a lovely exotic country. It has to be.
Beach?
Yeah, I do love a beach, a lovely, beautiful beach, lots of palm trees. I'm thinking very open, you open a lovely sliding, and you sort of walking down onto a lovely private beach, I think.
Amazing. Yeah. This is a theme that's coming out with this question. But I love it. I'll come and visit.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Please do.
Emily, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Property Particulars. Please join us again for another Property Particulars podcast sometime soon. Thank you.